Hi, everyone. Thanks for welcome to Disruptive Technologists' first 2022 Fireside Chat webinar, where we answer attendees' questions about real-time, real AI human chatbots. Last week, we had an AI panelist named Siri to webinar, but she's not yet ready for an attendee question and answer session. But we're excited to have our members and followers hanging with us. You can answer questions. You can ask questions and have them answered directed to Sarah's handler, who's John's son, who's also joining us tonight. Hi, John. Today we'll be answering questions about chatbots and real AI humans. Is the technology up to the hype? Meantime, I want to remind you that we have giveaways. 2 amazing books by Rebecca Costa and also 2-day passes to use Ginger Diwali's Uplex International offices for 2-day workspaces. Simply email your title, company, and email address to us at our Disruptive Technologists with an S, or message me on Disruptive Technologists meetup site, and we'll put your name into the lottery, and you'll be notified within 7 days. And we want to thank our sponsors, Esther Dyson and her Wellville Group, Ramona Wright and her Wright Communications Group, Jeff Paul and Zeotag, and Jabril Bensendran and his Triana Group, as well as Microsoft Reactor for their continued support. And now to you, Bruce, who is our AI content expert and our Disruptive Fireside Chat moderator. Thank you, Bruce.
Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, Lauren, and thank you to our distinguished panelists today, John Stein, Chris Duffy, Thales Spellisy, and John Son. This is a follow-up to last week where we had some very spirited discussion, but weren't able to ask any follow-up questions. I will start by throwing out the first question, which is, we talk a lot about being able to trust conversational AI. And I don't know that we necessarily all know what it means to trust it. John Stein, I'd actually like to start with you. The word trust is in the slogan of your initiative, the Open Voice Network. Can you describe to us what you mean by trust?
Bruce, thank you. And yeah, Executive Director of the Open Voice Network, we're a Linux Foundation open source community and focused on developing standards for conversational AI, specifically voice. And we talk about voice being worthy of user trust. Now, and Bruce, to your question, a lot of people just equate trust with some semblance of privacy or data use, but it's a full range. Trust is a continuum of, will this work? Will it work for me? Will my information be used in a way that's of value to me, that respects me? Are my relationships respected? You know, on and on and on. But it is based upon, and without going into the great details, we found, and the literature would certainly suggest, that trust is also based upon some commonly accepted norms and rules within an environment or society. You know, we have yellow lines on roads and tells us not to pass. You know, we have different types of standards and norms that govern our behavior. And when we can all trust someone else who we don't know, can we trust a stranger to behave in a certain way? Do we have confidence a stranger will behave in a certain way? Then we begin to create trust and the willingness for me to step out into, you know, an unknown situation and act in that unknown situation because I have a belief that there are norms and rules. So trust, you know, we could talk for hours just on this topic. Heavens knows I probably could, but I'll pass it back to you. That might be a starting point.
Yeah, John Son, you're on the developer side of this. What does trust mean to you?
Well, there are many factors to consider when we talk about trust, but as a software developing company, we want to give trust in a way that the actual solution works. So if a customer comes up to our AI human, for instance, Sarah, you guys all saw from the last meeting, we want to assure that it works. We want to implement AI human in lots of customer-facing industries, and our clients needs to make sure the system is working, and our clients' customers will also have to have the assurance that when a person orders the AI human, can deliver. So this is a short perspective that I have.
Great, thanks. Chris, your thoughts?
Yeah, just to extend, on the thoughts around trust. One example of that is an initiative Adobe is doing called our content authenticity. We just had a post out at it's in partnership with co-founding partners like Microsoft and Twitter, BBC, Intel. And essentially the partnership is around giving authorship to pieces of content and ultimately, I think, identifying deep fakes. And so I think that's one example of building trust with the viewer, the user, the consumer in terms of knowing the context of the content and the intent of the creators of the content.
Chris, on that point, last time that we spoke, we talked a little bit about the deepfake situation. And I think we just want to, I'll call it out. There's a difference between, I think, belief in the realism of the image that you're interacting with, as far as the chatbot goes, versus trusting the message, right? And we also talked about the deepfake, mapping the sort of facial movement, even the mouth movement to the language, the acoustics. And I think that there's a fine line between belief and trust with respect to that alignment.
And I would add to what Thales just said, and a good point, John, I'm going to push back a bit, is it needs to be the starting point of trust that it works, no question. But from a user's perspective, there is a next step, and I think Thales was speaking to this, is do I trust it to bring value to me? Am I being manipulated? Am I being, pushed in a certain way? Am I the mark? Or am I a participant here with some equal rights to, how this relationship should develop? So I think Thales, you make a very good point about, it's user expectation and user value. And is it delivering value in a way that's respectful of me? That is also, I think, a critical element in the technology trust equation.
Yeah, I love that. One aspect of that is ultimately transparency for the viewer or the user. And I think, this conversation and probably a broader conversation is very valuable in terms of an agreement, alignment, in terms of industry standards on how do we build trust and transparency across the industry, and what safeguards can we kind of the technology minds can all unite around to kind of circumvent, prevent a lot of these unintentional or bad actors in that regard.
Yeah.
Well, just to be honest with you, I talk for DeepBrain AI. So when we talk about deepfake, it's a bit different from what we have. I totally understand the fact that deepfake can manipulate people, send out false ideas. It's very controversial, but it does have its good use cases, and I think the technology itself will improve. But that's one of the reasons that we, based on a real person, our AI human models are based on a real person who can have actual control. Our clients can actually have control of the context and what to deliver. So these are some factors that we build to the client's customers and give trust and belief that the information that they're sending out is not wrong.
Yeah. John, just to, I think, extend that, there is a distinction between virtual humans, avatars, and deepfakes that are not necessarily one and the same. And I think probably one point of distinction is the intent. you know, like some of the examples you talked about in terms of having a news anchor or broadcaster kind of be represented virtually is a, you know, a very straightforward and great use case for your technology. Probably on the other end is the deep fakes, where they're sometimes trying to impersonate you know, different folks or different messages. And that's where I think, you know, this alignment around standards and guidelines to prevent use cases of that nature would be beneficial.
Chris, you make a great point. I'm sorry, Thales, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that that's sort of how we ended the last call, right? As I was just calling out that authenticity characteristic, if you will, because I think that we can probably get to a point where we can fool ourselves and our audiences into thinking that we're interacting with a human, be just graphically and even acoustically in terms of the response. Then the question becomes is, are we literally putting words in someone else's mouth, that of the humanoid, and then controlling you've established the trust of the believability of the interaction, but then the message becomes, it's much more, I think, you have to be on guard that you don't get fooled into believing the message when the message is wrong, but you're believing the source from which it's being delivered.
Thales, you make some great points. We've been studying synthetic voice within the Open Voice Network, and Chris, to your very good points earlier, you know, there is a transparency and a consent. You know, this voice may be synthesized. Do we know that? Are we aware of that when it's being delivered? And is this situation, let's say, an actor in a film, and the film is now being shown in a non-native country? Well, the voice is synthesized to fill in for that film. We all get that. The overdub. We get that. Now it's Samuel L. Jackson is speaking Mandarin. That's great. You know, fantastic. Versus deepfake versus the manipulation. And Chris, you made a great point, I thought, of, you know, we can't equate synthesis with deepfake. We are wrong to do that. But to your point, standardization and or just simply the awareness, transparency and consent, we know what is in front of us and we accept that. And Thales, to your point, it's knowing what's in front of us and where's the message coming from.
Right.
John, love that. Go ahead.
No, please, Chris, go ahead.
No, just to build on the point of consent, you know, I think that's still very much in development in terms of what is the best way to get consent. You know, there's been some early use cases on maybe are there some visual identifiers that this is a virtual human, you know, kind of unnatural eye color, I think has been experimented with. Would love to hear from the group if you've seen any or have any kind of preferred consent methods, just, you know, having the virtual human from the onstart identify themselves as an avatar, or I think that's an interesting point to how to build consent.
You know, what are the things
like a scarlet letter for the synths.
Yeah.
I mean, because I think that, you know, John, I asked you the question last time. You know, are you striving for the best possible imagery, right? The realism of the imagery, and you said yes, you were, and that was something that you wanted, that was important to you, to establish presumably a level of trust of the interaction. I don't want to put words in your mouth there, but when I was at a show just recently, there was some folks with the chatbot there, and I had this on my mind, and I asked them the same question, and they said, well, we strive to make it look human-like, but we don't want it to be too perfect because we want to be clear that your audience, clearly the audience that you're interacting with the synthetic being. And so I think that that's sort of a disclosure.
Yes, this is a very important factor for our business as well, because we always indicate that our virtual human, AI human, are AI. So in most of our promotional videos, we say, the AI human actually saying, I'm not a real person. We are AI human developed by DeepBrain AI. These mints are always there. When having some like AI anchors on air, we also indicate that it's a artificial human version of a real anchor. So indicating and acknowledging that this is an AI version is always most important. And the reason that we want to make the visual side as more human as possible is because we don't want to make barriers. So like young people can be very familiar with characters, with animated characters and everything else, but if you're not familiar with those kind of environment, it's much comfortable to see a actual human-like being when you talk on a screen. So these are the two things that we're trying to do.
John, one related topic, we touched on it last time. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the groups, is the topic of ownership in terms of if an avatar is based off of a human, kind of a well-known human, what are the ownership rights and what are those guidelines like? Have you explored that in more depth as well?
Well, it's practically the same as having a brand ambassador. So when you contract portrait rights with a celebrity, you have statements within the contract that within the promotional video, for instance, you're going to say something like that and something like this, right? So that's one of the reasons that we don't use AI chatbot, but use scenario-based chatbots, because most of our clients have a scene that's going to occur again and again, and it's going to be repeated. So there's no synthesis of new content. It's going to be within the contract information. So I'm mumbling, but I hope you understand what I'm trying to say.
John, I get that, but let me add, Chris, to your question. One thing we've been doing Open Voice Network is just taking a look at, let's say, and again, we're working in voice, not in visual avatars, but what should be the contract between a voice actor who is about to have his or her or their voice synthesized? What should be the relationship? Because there's been plenty, we're all aware from TikTok, et cetera, of voices being taken and used. So what should be the legal relationship? And then how might we always be able, say through an audio watermark, to identify if this is a synthesized voice?
I'm quite sure there's an NFT solution in here somewhere, but
no doubt, but crypto, whatever. But Chris, your very good question. Those are, the considerations you raised are, I think, front and center in front of us right now, especially as we are exploring all these different approaches.
If I may, I want to sort of circle back to a different angle that we haven't probed yet, which is you mentioned, John, that your current approach is a more scripted, I think, presentation of the message itself. But of course, there's the potential for, like in a call center scenario where there's really like a call response where if the user is, asking a question and they're expecting a verbal response. And we see this in text chatbots, right? Where you type in your text and then the other side of the equation is figuring out how to respond. Same conversation, with a verbal response from an AI where you want to provide a synthetic verbal response. And then that comes back to the trust of the equation, right? How do we build confidence that not only is the response understanding us the question appropriately, but that the response that's being provided can be sort of believed, and there's a trust value there as well.
It's
so that's not your current mechanism, but I think it's something that is part of the discussion, I think.
It's a very important thing to consider, and well, it's very hard to say we're perfect at the moment. Obviously, we're on the way. We're trying to make things better and more smoother as it goes, but we try to build up as much as scenarios, use cases within the chatbot as possible so that the AI human can actually take care of most of the simple questions. And if there are things that AI human cannot control, it's going to say that this is out of my range. You have to actually go to an actual person for assistance. So for instance, in a bank, there are simple chores that an AI human can actually handle. But if it's going to have some paperwork or some complicated jobs, the AI human can allocate to an actual banker who can process it. But this is beneficial for both customers and the banker is because we can take basic pre-surveys of what the customer needs in the bank, and then it shortens the waiting time for the customer, and it augments the workforce because it shortens the repeated work for the AI the banker itself. So it's beneficiary in both sides. And by doing this, I think we give more trust because rather than giving out wrong answers, we can say, this is out of my safe zone, please go to an actual person for more information.
So it feels like there's two tiers to the AI side of the equation, where they have to do the voice recognition and establish that into a syntax, and then analyze the syntax as the second step to figure out how to respond. And then, of course, that response can be synthesized back into an acoustic, signal. So I guess my question is a little bit around the speech recognition component of it, be it for multiple dialects or multiple languages or different accents, and how does your AI establish confidence that it's digested that accordingly and interpreted accordingly before getting to the second tier, which is now, can they provide a response that's within their capacity, or do they need to hand it off to a human?
This is something that I have to say. Our core technology itself is actually video synthesis. So for the STT and all that, we may use third-party solutions as well, so that it can adapt to the local language as much as possible. If we have the text, we can interpret it, we can video synthesize it and give out answer as if a real person is speaking. But when you can't understand it, that's a problem right there. So we try to localize it as possible.
That fails the inclusivity of voice, and voice recognition is a huge issue. It's a significant issue, and you are very appropriate to focus on it. Most language sets have been trained on baritone voices like mine coming from the US Midwest. But voices of different tenor, different tone, and different inflection, much less, the recognition, the accuracy drops. So, having the training sets on multiple types of voices, dialects, inflections, tone, all that critical to, again, that trust, as you point out, that first level of trust. Do you understand me? Are you listening to me? And then it moves from there. So you call out a great point.
Yeah, and that brings up another equally important topic of unintended biases in training sets, which ultimately, surface in the end execution. And that's something we're heavily focused on. We've got a product called Adobe Stock, which has millions and millions of images and has some a number of search functionalities that are AI powered to find similar images faster, or by keyword search or by tone and color. And so that's something we're continuously trying to prevent our biases in terms of searching for images. And it's a great point. Over the last few years, it's gotten better, but even with these voice assistants, a number of there's preferred training, there's larger training sets for different type of voices, which I think we've got to overcome as well.
Feels you also.
I don't know. I'm sorry to interrupt everyone, but I think, can everyone just kind of say what their name and their title is for our attendees, and just so they know, because I know you, Chris, you talked about some Adobe products, and I just thought it'd be helpful for the attendees to know who didn't come to the last session to know what's going on. Maybe start with you, what you do at Adobe.
Great point. Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Duffy. I'm strategic development for Creative Cloud at Adobe, and an underpinning backbone to everything we do is powered by our tapestry of artificial intelligence system called Adobe Sensei, and it is essentially surfaced in three aspects. One is on a feature level, one is on a service level, and the third on an API level. So looking forward to having another great discussion with everyone on all the opportunities with AI.
I guess I'll go next.
Yeah, Dale's go for it, and then John Stein, and then John Stein. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Dale Spellacy. I'm a career enterprise architect. I've been working with fairly who's who of the financial services here in New York City for the past 20+ years. So I've seen all of these larger banks, of course, have at least one or two versions of a technology, and I've seen many of them. And this is, I think, a brave new, a rather fast-growing area of technology, and it's one that I think is both brings great value and also some, I think, some hazard that needs to be managed appropriately.
John Sun, you want to go for it?
Hi, hello, my name is John Sun. I'm with DeepBrain AI. I am, well, former strategic planning manager in DeepBrain AI, now focusing on the business development of APAC region. What we have here is a solution of AI human, what we call an AI human. When we give a script to an AI human, it can talk as if the real person is speaking. A chatbot integrated with this AI human, you can have a conversational AI version of this product. The easiest way you can understand is by saying Siri or Alexa with a human appearance. Hope to talk to you soon.
Great. And John Stein?
Hi, John Stein, Executive Director of the Open Voice Network, talking to you from surprisingly sunny Portland, Oregon. And again, we're the Linux Foundation open source community dedicated to developing standards for the emerging world of voice assistants.
Great. And Bruce, I don't know if you know, but we've got a bunch of questions in our chat if you want to see if people want to answer those.
Well, indeed, there's the theme of the questions in the chat. If I take the liberty of summarizing them, is comes back to the idea of how close to mimicking a human do we want to go? Bearing in mind, of course, the principle that just because we can do something doesn't mean that we ought to do it. So you've touched on it a little bit, and there are like 3 or 4 questions in the thread here. But let's go back to that. How close do we want to get, and how do we meet the expectations of the humans in terms of knowing that they are dealing with mechanical or not? Of course, I'll also share an experience I had, which was that I was dealing with a customer service organization that I won't name. And at one point I got so frustrated, I said, please put me in touch with a human. And the answer came back, I am a human. So maybe we've gone too far the other way as well. But let me throw that back out. So how close do we want to get? Is that perhaps culture specific?
I think this question is a bit controversial, so I think I should start. Because our perspective is we want to get as human as possible. And this is because we want to give customer experience, even if it's an AI, conversational AI, we want to, like, in a way, think that give the comfort to the customers thinking that they're actually talking to a real person. So in our perspective, in DeepBrain AI's perspective, we want to be as human as possible. And I'm pretty sure that there are other opinions towards it.
And Bruce, I'll toss out an opinion or a different perspective. And with respect to what John and his team are doing, I think the question needs to be approached not from the technology's perspective, but from the user's perspective. What is most believable and what is most trustworthy? There was a fascinating study done a couple of years ago at Indiana University, doctoral level business school, looking at the believability of two different types of voices in providing medical advice. Now, again, this is conversational AI. This is voice-enabled conversational AI. One of the voices was the deep Midwestern baritone, similar to mine. The other voice was the Rosie, the robot from the Jetsons, giving advice from the computer, giving and sharing information. And of course, this was an academic study, so they're talking to freshman students and giving advice as to, you should take this medicine or take this medicine, and it was tied into COVID. Which was more believable? Which led to the desired behaviors? It was the Rosie the robot, because it was perceived, it was being, you were getting information from the computer, and the computer was not prejudiced. So there may be different approaches and different voices and different personas that will meet a specific usage goal and the interests and needs of the users. And that study has stuck with me, because it, you know, we all talk about what voice do you have in voice and what voice should you sound like. Well, maybe you should just talk like Rosie the robot and be like this. I don't know.
Wonderful point. You know, on a similar vein, another research study related in the healthcare world found a similar outcome in terms of patients preferred a virtual assistant over humans in some ways because they didn't feel judged. And so I think this goes to the broader point. This is still very early on in this new frontier. Last time we chatted about the metaverse, and I think you know, that's an indication of we're entering this new universe of imagination and infinite opportunities to fold space and jump to different experiences. But ultimately what that's driving is we're going to have the opportunity to tap into different aspects of our own personality. And so I think, you know, with that comes the ability for optionality. So maybe some person at one point would prefer a human, one would prefer at a different point an AI human, one would prefer, you know, a virtual monkey avatar and so on. So I think, you know, it's quite exciting in terms of this is just the beginning, and, you know, there's room for optionality in terms of, you know, how does this get best expressed when and where?
As I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking a little bit out loud here, but I think of three things. One, there's the tool vendor. So like John's team right there, that's your tool creator and the tool vendor. Then there's a tool user, who's John's client. And then there's the audience / end user, who's the person ultimately consuming the product, right? And I think that depending upon the use case, it's one thing if it's for entertainment. So John's got an artificial bot delivering the news. I think it's quite another thing for answering questions, where you've got like a customer support line kind of a use case. But then I think there's a piece about, and we talked about trust and believability, but about consent and disclosure. If he's trying to make the most foolproof humanoid experience and not disclose that, that's a bit deceitful, right? So now we've stepped over the trust boundary in that capacity. And so, and this goes back to my disclosure comment, which is, do we really want it so that we've got an ability to not disclose and an ability to be fooled? I'm not sure that's a valuable objective. Like, what would be the motive there?
I think the comments that have been made are very it's also what we think as well. There are circumstances. We're very early stage with this technology. We will need time for actual humans to understand this technology and feel that this is an AI. Well, there may be some cultural barriers because in certain parts of the world, having human replaced is very uncomfortable. It's an unpleasant thing. But in some parts of the world, the new technology being implemented is very welcomed. So there are some cultural differences within this item here. But thing is, the funny fact is we do actually have use cases, and the use cases that we're currently creating is with broadcasting companies, financial companies like banks, and education companies. We have built an application with AI Tutor. Personalized comments are possible to the actual viewers, students, for example. And they're implementing this because a virtual version of Monkey giving information is not just trustworthy. So I think it's just the different use cases where we should implement this and that.
Helen, you raised a question in chat, and let me address that. And following up what John just said, I think there's a number of situations across industries where it will be ethically trustworthy and believable to have, let's say, a bot provide information and answer questions. We're doing a study in remote patient management because we're looking at a future of aging baby boomers, old people like me, who are fast, pushing into the Social Security Medicare range and a shortage of doctors. Boom. How do we as a society provide medical care to this community who increasingly, we won't have the monies nor the hospitals to take care of everybody and put them in institutions? How do we provide remote patient care with a shortage of doctors and a surplus of patients? There may be opportunities for avatars, bots to provide information, answer questions, schedule appointments, remind us to take medicines. And so there is a extension of knowledge, not replacement, but an extension of knowledge through automation that could be very, very useful. There's a shortage of second language teachers in the United States. How do we, and again, in a global society, how do we enable children to learn multiple languages? This may be an opportunity, as John was saying. So I think there's a number of situations in which the avatar, the automation, the bot, and et cetera, may provide opportunity. There are societal reasons, again, to Thal's point, it's transparency, it's consent, it's awareness. Do we know what we're getting into? Do we know what is working with us? I think are all critical elements, critical pieces of the equation, but it's in front of us.
On the medical use case there, I find myself thinking about there's a liability and or a waiving of rights in that interaction, where the assumption is that the medical AI will provide the right answers, and if it doesn't, then they're exposed and providing the wrong answers. Unless, of course, the user agrees to waive liability, in which case they're a victim of the potential wrong answer.
They are, exact fellowship. You're absolutely correct. We would give consent to have a bot listening into us, monitoring our breathing, monitoring our falls, reminding me to take my medicines.
Now, to be clear, I think as we roll this forward into, future world, these tools will become more and more sophisticated, and some of these issues will be worked out and sorted out and smoothed out. And I suspect there will be a future in which at which time they'll just be ubiquitous synths, however they manifest, and society will get comfortable with them to the degree that they want to, and they will become, more or less ubiquitous, like cars. I mean, when the first cars came out, I'm sure there was some apprehension. That's past.
Cars is a very good example, but see, when you wanted to look up the weather, it was always going back to the newspaper or in the internet era, you search the internet, but now you just ask your phone what the weather is going to be today. And people are always adapting to new technology. It may take time, but I think gradually it can be adopted.
But adopted, again, back to some of the earlier points, adopted with the framework of standards and transparency and consent and awareness. What are we getting into as opposed to blindly rushing forward?
Yeah, I think we have to show our work before we just get to the answer as we're going through this transition, right, to a degree.
All right, so I'd like to actually jump off from that point. Okay, let's imagine for a moment that the barriers that we're seeing today about privacy, about ethics, about bias. Let's assume that we've found solutions to all of those. What will the world look like when voice becomes ubiquitous, as several of you have just said? What can you imagine?
Well, I don't know if you've seen that movie, Her, the synthetic girlfriend. And the story plot, if you haven't seen it, spoiler alert, you know, the guy falls in love. And then it's revealed at the end that she is entertaining conversations with 7 million other endpoints. Highly scalable.
You know, Bruce, we talk about futurists who we've talked to have said, you know, we're going to be in a world of AI and every AI will be conversational. It will be, you know, and we separate the interface, which may be a visual avatar, it could be a voice interface, with increasingly personal AIs who first are assistants and then become independently working on our behalf agents. That's out there. Now, it's still the subject of film and, you know, metaverse conversations at CES, but it's out there.
You know, one aspect Sliver spoke that we're focused on is how can these AI assistants help advance creativity? So I think that's a tremendously exciting kind of lens in terms of it can currently, and even more so in the future, take away the grunt work, the repetitive tasks. But I think the higher promise that we're getting, that it's advancing to very quickly, is where it gets predictive and suggestive. So the AI assistant understands you so well that it can predict, you know, suggestions of moments of delight, or you know, be a true utility. So I think that's quite exciting. On the flip side, from a broader philosophical standpoint, with that great knowledge, there is kind of a line that could be crossed at some point in terms of where does suggestive turn into being manipulative. And I think that's something, you know, is probably on a case-by-case basis where, you know, that again goes back to the ethics and the guidelines for each use case.
Because we're just talking about the future, I'll just use my imaginations. Well, Thales mentioned Her. I'm a Marvel fan. Basically, when we talk about conversational AI and future of AI bots, it's going to be Jarvis in Iron Man, right? It's going to be it's going to be in your everyday life. It's going to help you work out, whatever you do every day. I hope that's the future for for me as well, because I want that kind of assistant. And I think all of us would actually like to have that Jarvis as an assistant. He can do everything for you. So that's the future, what I think will happen.
You know, I'd love to have Jarvis, but I also see in using the precedent of social media, we can have Jarvis feed me the food I need or the food I want. And Jarvis could be giving me junk food all day long because that's what I like. That's what I want. That's my personal thing. And we see that in social media, and that is entirely predictive and possible with our personal AI. So there is, yes, we talk about personalization, we talk about our agent, but you know, heavens, in my weak moments, my Jarvis will be feeding me Reese's peanut butter cups.
You know, on this thread here, I feel like it's almost a self-inflicted desire to outsource critical thinking and abandon your own agency in that capacity. Now, I'm sure some would be, that sounds great. You know, just, you know, just spoon feed me whatever it is you think I need. On the flip side, to your point, what if you want to challenge that? And how does that sort of critical thinking interaction, you know, interact? You're basically challenging the recommendation.
I think there was a comment in the chat that it won't be any better than the levels of ignorance or stupidity or prejudice of the humans program or writing the algorithms. That was a very good point.
So what do we need to be doing today to ensure that we have the utopic outcome and not the dystopic outcome?
Well, I suspect one of the things we need to consider anyways is to not be seduced into rushing to the final outcome. And that maybe going slow is perhaps a little bit prudent to evaluate some of these interactions and the outcomes of those interactions. I'm not sure there's any mad rush to get quote there. I'm not sure we actually want a WALL-E like experience where we're just sitting in chairs and everything's happening around us and we're not doing anything. I'm not sure that's the desired outcome, but just one man's perspective.
You know, Bruce, there's many things I would add to that. One thing I would say is we need to quit bowing at the altar of personalization because it's a selfish, non-societal, non-communal act. And I think it's a huge issue for us.
Wait, what do you mean by that? Expound a little bit more on that.
I come from retail technology and enterprise technology, and personalization is one of the leading guiding desires in making it best for the customer. I want it personalized. I want it for me. I want it my way. And in commerce and a number of things, absolutely, you want it personalized. The more customized or personalized, the better. But you continue to take that, Lauren, to levels of back to the junk food analogy. If I truly want what I want, I might have Reese's peanut butter cups 3 meals a day because that's what I like the most. And we see that in social media. We see that in a number of places where you go to the lowest common denominator and become an echo chamber of yourself. It's a trap. As Admiral Akbar would say, it's a trap.
And it's a self-inflicted wound as well.
Self-inflicted wound.
You know, if you think about it, we had Sarah as our chatbot panelist last week, and she was only programmed with what she knew from DeepBrain, from John's company. They programmed her to say what they wanted her to say. I mean, if you think about it, do regular people that are listening to these chatbots on phones and on platforms and the computer and stuff, they don't realize that this is pre-programmed by someone who already has personality, already has their own personalization, their own priorities involved in that. It's interesting to think that, can you program a chatbot to be totally unbiased? I don't think so.
So, Lauren, just a quick clarification. I think John's Sarah rendition, we've already established that it's a scripted delivery. So it's not an interactive delivery, right? But I think you raise a great point, which is, you know, in an interactive model, the training of the, you know, ML or AI we've already demonstrated that they're prone to bias. So we need to be mindful of those biases.
We'd have the bias of the listening. We'd have the bias of the human creating, the scripted delivery. It's just inherent in it. It's part of how this works.
So to kind of get back to Bruce's question, as a startup, DeepBrain AI, I think we should try to introduce as far-fetched technology as possible in the meantime, and then we have to see how it actually is implemented into the actual society, because there are many visions shown in movies, stories, everywhere. We want to get something that we don't have yet, but for instance, Jarvis, but we're not sure how it's going to be used and how it can be helpful. But as a startup, I think we should try to go as far as possible to develop such technology for people to use.
Bruce, I would challenge you to ask us about our thoughts about regulation in the space. Any kind of governance.
One more time, please.
I'm just saying, should this technology come with any kind of rules, regulations, governance, control,
I think it might differ from information, what type of information this bot is taking care of. If there are things that should be regulated and should have standards, I think it definitely needs standards. But I think it really differs to what sort of information they're taking care of.
One analogy that's used quite often, back to the automotive, is speed limits, right? I don't think there's many people that disagree with the general notion of having speed limits, or even another aspect is seatbelts. So I think much like that, we'll need some speed limits and seatbelt laws or regulation and guidance around a lot of this technology.
But Chris, will we be proactive about it? Because it's my experience that someone usually has to get killed in the crosswalk before a stop sign gets put up, right?
No. Yeah, so I would offer, as technology companies try to push the limits with emerging technologies, equally in parallel have to be have equal due diligence in creating frameworks and guidance and governance around the use of that technology as well.
That's one of the reasons, if I may interrupt, that's one of the reasons why there's a nonprofit Linux Foundation organization dedicated to developing those kind of standards for voice. It's give a neutral place for companies to come together to try and have those discussions and make those decisions.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I really applauded the decision of Adobe to not release that Voco product. Now, maybe there's a future for it, but I think we're probably not ready for that yet.
No. Yeah. I was just looking at who decides, the regulation and the standards, and that's a multi-layered approach. I think it's incumbent on the company itself, the teams that are building the tech, to have an ethics committee. I think it's, to your point, kind of a industry body that helps guide these, use cases and governance as well. So I think the more layers to governance, the better, as we're just getting this off the ground in many ways.
And then, of course, there's the global complication I was imagining, when we're talking about governance. So let's say, we don't have time to get into this tonight. This would be a great topic for another time. But a user in Brazil uses a cloud platform that's hosted, say, in Germany, to access an avatar that's running in South Korea. Whose laws apply? I don't think we know the answer to that yet. Anyway, so we're getting close to near the end. One last round, a minute each. Your takeaways and what you'd like people to remember from our discussion tonight. John Stein, we'll start with you.
It's technology and it's the questions of ethics, trust, believability, and the like. We can't do one without the other. And the questions must all be brought together at the same time as technology runs its course, which is so exciting.
Crypto's in the news these days. I read an article recently that they were discussing about how to regulate that, and some of the questions that are being asked in that space are things like, is there an expectation of profit? Is there an expectation that this thing will appreciate? Is there an expectation of obligation on the producer of the product that there are certain outcomes? And I think these are the kinds of questions we need to be asking about that, tool development, tool consumer, end user impact, to start to inform how we think about these considerations.
Well, for my case, as a solution provider, we also have meetings on how we should provide our AI human to the actual customers themselves. One of the outcome is continuously indicating that our AI human is a virtual avatar of a real person. And that's what we're trying to pursue at the moment. But we do have lots of internal conversations on how to bring standards. We do a lot of talk with customers as well. We don't want to fool people, we want to help people. So let's hope that we find a good way, gray area, not a gray area, wrong wording, but I hope we find a good, safe side of this technology as soon as possible.
Great. Yeah, for me, it all comes from a personal perspective. It all comes down to one word: empowerment. Empowerment to the world. How does this technology empower society? How does this technology empower the individual? And I think that's a great North Star for technology, ultimately, to have that check and balance. Does this truly empower those three aspects?
And I just want to say thank you, everyone. You were wonderful. Thank you, Bruce, all of our panelists. And we'll see you at our next spring webinar on the metaverse. And thank you all for being here. And you can see us on our YouTube channel, Disruptive Technologists, and on our website, disruptivetechnologists.com, and in our meetup group, Disruptive Technologists in NYC. Thank you, everyone. Have a good one.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.